One. Well, good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen. And for those viewers out there, we're broadcasting live from Mexico City, our temporary offices because of the earthquake and all that. But this is another episode of Dojo Live, connecting with experts like you. And today, we are honored to have Diana Larsen. Diana Larsen, she's co-founder of FutureWorks consulting firm, and also she is an expert in Agile methodology. So welcome, Diana. Thank you for being here today in our show in Dojo Live.
Thank you for having me. Yeah,
absolutely. It's our pleasure. And of course, we have Luis Ortiz right there, 1,500 miles away in our other office. Oh, wait a minute. You're back, Luis, right?
Yeah, I'm in the Mexico City office already, yeah.
Okay, so whatever remains from the Mexico City office, he's there.
Oh, my goodness.
He's a brave, courageous man willing to go to the office. All right. So, Luis, thank you again for being here with us.
Thank you.
Okay. So, Diana, well, today this is going to be, for those folks out there who are watching, this is going to be we don't have a specific topic, except other than the fact that if you already know Diana's work, this is going to be an open interview for Diana. So take advantage, folks out there. And you can also send us your questions please send us your questions for Diana right here on Twitter at DojoLIVE. All right. With that being said, thank you both for being here. And Luis, this is your show, so I'm going to pass on the mic to the experts. Luis.
Great.
It's all yours.
I mean, I would like to be the host of this interview, but Diana is the one that's going to be talking away, right? So, well, first of all, Diana, why don't you introduce yourself? We all know you as the retrospectives goddess, as we were talking right now. But why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you do? What do you work?
Well, I do a lot of different kinds of work with organizations, mostly around Agile. Either Agile adoptions or, Agile adoptions gone wrong that we're redoing, or those kinds of things. My background has been a long, long time in the development of team-based workplaces. So before there was Agile, I was working in high-tech and IT organizations, helping them transition from groups of individual contributors to more effective and efficient work as part of a collaborative team. And so that's been my work for a long time. One of the things that you learn very quickly doing that work is that you also need to become helpful to in developing the managers, because their jobs change when they're no longer managing individual contributors, but now managing teams. And that shift means an organizational change. So organizational change management and understanding change and complex systems also became a part of what I needed to do my job. So that's been the thread that's gone through pretty much all of my work. And when I was first introduced to Agile in 2001, well, 2000 actually, in 1999, 2000, my response to the people who were telling me about that was, well, how are you going to help managers get on board? And this is an organizational change, right? How are you going to manage this change? So it's interesting to me to have watched over the past, 15, 17 years, how those issues just keep rising to the top. That, we can work with teams all we want, but if we're not creating a workplace environment where teams can be successful, then our Agile adoption can't succeed either. And so that's the area that I do most of my work in.
Great. Yeah. So I've always seen you as an Agile expert, but now hearing this story from yourself, it seems more that you are more of like an organizational expert, right? And then made the switch or the transition to Agile. That's actually something that I've been watching a lot since I've been working with Agile. Is this, it's it's the separation from the agile culture, and then the
Mm-hmm.
organization, which is
Right.
the administrative things, the hierarchies and all that.
Right.
So
Right.
you being an expert in organizational environments, why did you make the switch to agile? What made you say, this is the way to do it, or this is the
Well,
effective way to
yeah.
organize?
Well, the reason that I switched to Agile is I like working with software people. Basically, I mean, there was a time in my life when I thought I might become a software engineer, and my dad was a systems analyst, so I've always thought in terms of systems um, and what systems are more fascinating than software applications and software systems. So, and I mean, so that's what drew me in. I mean, I met a lot of people. Some of them were Agile Manifesto signers. Others were just very early adopters of the various Agile methodologies. And, we recognized early on that we had things in common and each had something to contribute to the other. And so that's how I even began working in this area. And it just was a really good fit. I enjoy working with software people very much. And in general, we tend to, create good working relationships together. So that is what made the switch. Yeah.
Great. So also in your LinkedIn description, it mentions that you work building your clients' proficiency in shaping environments for productive teams. What does shaping environments mean? Is it a physical thing, or what does it involve?
Well, yes, and lots of other things. One of the things that I have come to believe over the years that I've been working in this area is that there's a term called knowledge workers that Peter Drucker, who's a very famous management consultant, created in the 1950s and 60s. He started talking about there are people who are knowledge workers. They don't work necessarily with their hands, they work with their brains. And that was a whole category of people who take in information, transform it, are creative with it, and so on. And that certainly is true for software development. I mean, everybody who's involved in software development is a knowledge worker, no matter whether they're on the product side, business side, engineering side, whatever. And so, I've had that understanding for a long time, but in the last few years, I've begun to realize more and more that it's not so much knowledge work as it is learning work. There is a continuous process of learning, both for sort of continuous process improvement, but also learning about the customer, learning about how the code is behaving, learning about what the product owner needs from us and how things fit together, learning how to work as a part of a team effectively, learning, just so many dimensions of learning. So a lot of what makes putting together an effective and productive environment where people can perform and meet business needs is understanding what creates a good environment for team learning and for people to learn as a team. And so some of that is physical, some of that is making sure that conversations can happen. And I mean, you told me earlier that you work a lot with remote teams and have an affinity for that. Alistair Cockburn said a long time ago that the richest form of communication happens two people face to face in front of a whiteboard. And that's a lot of why Agile people at first tended to advocate for co-located teams. So, but what happens if you're not co-located? And I think then the standard is, how do you get as close as possible to two people face to face in front of a whiteboard as you can? What are the tools that you need? What are the electronic media that you need? And so that, you know, that I think is, there's a physical environment, there's also a virtual environment that you need to set up so that people can learn from each other. And so that those things are going on. I'm very excited about some of the folks I know who are experimenting with mob programming remotely. And there are a number of experiments in that going on around the world. And so looking for those ways that we can work together, what kind of an environment do we need to work together, collaborate, in a physical environment or a virtual environment, what is going to foster those conversations that increase our learning and our ability to learn. And that's really what we're talking about. And what that looks like in any given workplace will be different, depending on the work and the, you know, what's already there and so on. And the nature of how people are managed. You know, if they're punished for mistakes, not so much learning is going to happen. So all of those kinds of things go into that kind of creating a really good workplace for people.
Got it.
Yeah.
And well, that you kind of touched my follow-up question, which is, you know, whenever you started this, it wasn't about remote teams. It was about co-located teams, and also the organizational structure was a lot more hierarchical. I mean, we can still see that, but there's many organizations such as Nearsoft where we try to have a flat organization. There's no managers and stuff. So that definitely changes the work environment.
Yes.
I would say for the good, because I had the opportunity to work in a different culture and now in this culture, and I feel like I work better. But how do you feel about it? Does it make sense to make that switch to a remote team, or do people really work better when they're co-located? How do you feel about that change, not only for co-location but the hierarchy thing as well?
Well, I think co-location makes some things easier. It makes some communication flows easier, potentially. I mean, you can set up even a physical co-located workplace with lots of barriers to communication in it, and then that doesn't necessarily make it better.
Correct.
But if you are co-located, you have the opportunity for faster handoffs, faster communication flows, overhearing conversations, those kinds of things. And it's harder to do that when you're working remotely. And so you need to pay more attention to that. You need to, you know, that's why things like Slack have come into existence and so on. People tried IRC channels and that wasn't really quite up to the task. So then they look for something else, then they look for something else, and we keep improving it. The interesting thing for me is, you know, in the early days, the argument about remote working, distributed teams was, well, we miss out on all the nonverbal cues and things like that. Well, now we have really good video channels, and you can see people's expressions, and you can see if they're you know, brows are furrowed and they're not really understanding what's going on or whatever. So we now have that, but now the researchers are telling us that we also communicate in a lot of other ways, like just like pheromones and someone now says that we all walk around in a cloud of sort of discarded skin cells and things, and those interact in some way and cause communication to happen.
That's a new one.
So,
I haven't heard that one.
We haven't actually solved how to do those things over the internet in the way that we have the sort of visual cues.
Yeah.
But I expect that that's probably on its way someday, maybe. But you know, so those things just make it harder to work remotely, and I think that where remote working works is when people really double down on ensuring that communication is going to happen. They make lots of time and space for it. They give lots of slack for it. I'll use the example again of mob programming teams I know that are working remotely. They have a short retrospective every single day. So they are always reflecting on how they're working with each other and making sure that that conversation is alive all the time and always available. So it's, you know, it's not that it's impossible to work remotely. It certainly isn't. There are a lot of people doing it very successfully, like yourself. But you just have to pay a lot more attention to the learning, that making sure everyone is getting the opportunities for learning, and that those communication channels stay even wider open than you might otherwise think about. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess what you're saying it's that it needs to be intentional, right? Like it needs to have the intention to do it.
Right. If you're sitting together in a place, it's easy to overhear what's going on next to you. And if you hear your name, you're going to be, you know, that automatically pulls your attention, right? So you might walk over and they, you know, find out that they need something from you. That's much harder to do when you're working remotely. So people have to put an extra effort into, let's pull so-and-so into this conversation, not just hope that they will overhear, right?
Correct.
So it's those kinds of things that we have to kind of step up our game in that area. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Then I also have a follow-up question on that, and I think that you also touched the topic there. You mentioned the retrospectives as a tool for improvement. As I mentioned before, we, or at least part of the Nearself team, has the impression of you being the retrospectives goddess, right? How come? How did that happen? How did you get to become specialized in Agile retrospectives, and why?
Okay.
I mean, I see them as the cornerstone, the cornerstone for improvement, right, in any team. However, in some other teams that I've been part of, they called postmortems, and it's not the same. Some people think they're the same. So, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, part of how I got introduced to a lot of the software people that I was meeting back in the early 2000s, 1990s, was I had a colleague named Norman Kurth that I knew through some work here. Like, he also lives in Portland, and we knew each other. And he was writing a book about end of project retrospectives.
Okay.
And he actually invited me. He led those for a lot of people. But one time he was asked to be an interim manager. And after his team delivered their product, he wanted to have a retrospective on that. But he knew as the manager that he could not lead that retrospective and facilitate it himself. So he invited me in to do that. And he had also worked with Esther Derby in a similar way. She's the co-author of Agile Retrospectives. And so I went in, I learned his process for doing retrospectives. I recognized some of the things that we were already doing in developing other teams. And then Esther and I met, and we began interacting and collaborating. And then when Agile really started growing, we said and actually there was some in London who started doing what they were calling heartbeat retrospectives at the end of every iteration. The people at Connextra who came up with the I want so that user story formula. That same company had begun to do what they called heartbeat retrospectives at the end of every iteration. And so all of that went together, and Esther and I looked at it and said, most people who are working on software teams don't know how to facilitate these kinds of meetings. Can we give them some tools to do this, and suggest that more frequent retrospectives means you get to improve the effort that you are currently involved in, not wait to the end of it and hope you can improve the next effort, right? And so so that's why we wrote the book. we took what we had learned from Norm and what we had learned working, both of us had done work with a lot of other teams, and we put that together into the Agile Retrospectives book and said, here's how you can, when Norm was talking about end of project retrospectives, he was talking about 3 days. Well, how can you get good results and good improvement when you have an hour and a half every other week, right? Yeah. And so that's what we put our focus on. How can we make this something that can be a fairly short meeting, but can keep that continuous improvement idea moving along and continuous learning moving along, and that's why we wrote the book. And and now everybody thinks retrospectives are always part of Agile right from the beginning, and
exactly.
And they actually weren't.
That's what I thought at first.
Yeah. So, but that's how I got involved with it, and it was a good way to bring what I knew about developing collaborative teams. It was a good way to bring that knowledge into the Agile community in a small way to begin with, so that we could then start feeding in more. Like, I've already also written a book on chartering teams for Agile teams, and that also comes out of that past experience.
And I've talked before about this, Diana, with some other people. What do you think Agile was born in software industry? I'm going to tell you my thoughts on that. It was because they are the only ones that recognize this ever-changing environment, right? And every other industry, a normal organization, I think their perception was, let's hire the top experts, and boom, they have nothing to improve. They are at the forefront.
Right.
Nobody saw the need to improve before, which makes no sense for me. Why do you think it started all in software industry?
Well, I think there's a recognition of that. I mean, the Agile Manifesto says we've been doing software and we've learned a lot about how to make it better, and we want to share that. Mm-hmm. And so certainly there is that, but there's also a stream of thinking that led into that awareness in that group of people. The people who were thinking about Scrum had studied the Toyota production system. The people who came up with XP had worked in some environments that were very team friendly. And so they had both experiences. That, different people had other experiences of other ways of working from other industries. And the cool thing was this group recognized that software is a complex thing. It is an emergent thing. It's not a thing that you can plan out well in advance, like building a house, where you can, have your blueprint and have that blueprint stay more or less the same. There still may be some adjustments, but you're more or less going to get the house you expected to get. In software, you may not get the software you expected to get at all, because the whole world is changing all the time, along with the way we're developing and our awareness of technologies and ways that things can fit together keep changing all the way along. Yeah. And so I do think that software gave a very fertile ground for these ideas to sort of flower in a new way. And now what's interesting is we hear companies talking about business agility, right? Yeah. It's like many of the ideas came into software from different businesses, and now it's being fed back out. And that's kind of an interesting and beautiful thing, I think.
Great.
Yeah.
I'd like to, if I may, just sorry to interrupt, but I'd like to step in real quick, because I want to remind the audience that if you have any questions for Diana, you can send them over here on Twitter.
Yeah.
At DojoLIVE.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go. I think that's even better.
There you go.
Perfect.
Yeah,
now that's the DojoLIVE spirit.
Right.
We love low tech also. So.
Right.
Okay, with that being said, I have a question that kind of thought of, even though that maybe not so much from the engineering or software perspective, but this is it's more about teams in general, or working environments in general. And it's, if I were to ask you, Diana, what sort of, let's say, the 2 or the 3 gotta haves, for example, that a team should have in order to thrive in times of change, which ones would these be? What can you tell our audience? They might be, remember, not only software developers, but also or maybe, you know, marketing teams, or, you know, different areas. Is what would you say the 3 gotta haves are for thriving in times of change?
Well, I mean, this is going to sound kind of glib, but definitely you need to build your resilience and confidence in your ability to learn as you encounter new situations is really key there. If we know that things are going to keep changing, we can either become paralyzed by all the things I don't know, or we can develop the ability to learn more quickly and incorporate our learning into how we act, and that helps us be more resilient and more flexible. You know, there's an acronym that we hear used a lot now called VUCA, VUCA, that stands for volatile, uncertain, ambiguous, and complex. And so, you know, that those are the kinds of environments that we often find ourselves in, the kind of business environments, the kinds of workplace environments. You know, things are changing all the time. We don't really understand the nature of those changes necessarily in advance. Even once we kind of understand what they are, they may still not be entirely clear. And there's a lot of streams that are flowing into this. We can't ever find just one root cause for a thing. There are numerous things working together, and that makes things complex. So the more we develop skills that help us deal more effectively with ambiguity, deal more effectively with the need for learning and being resilient, deal more effectively with the complexities that we face, have a lot of tools in our toolbox so that we can pull them out as we need them. Those are all, I think, critical elements to what we're talking about that we need as we move forward. And we need to think about things differently. You know, managers, for instance, need to think about how that they are managing a work system, not a group of individuals. What is the difference between managing a team and managing individual people and directing their work? There's too much to know. No one can know everything they need to know about a process. So we have to learn to trust each other. So trust and compassion comes into this. And then courage, the courage to be able to say, you know, I don't know, let's figure this out. As long as any of us.
That takes courage.
Yeah, it takes a lot of courage. And the more we move up in the hierarchy, the more we become a senior engineer or an architect or a manager, the more we think we're supposed to have all the answers. And the more we get trapped by that because we can't know all the answers. So what we need to do is learn to rely on what some people call co-intelligence. I don't need to have the answers, but if I can understand what knowledge you bring to the table and what skills you have to offer and what skills you have, Carlos, and what skills other team members have, so that I can look to each of you in turn when certain issues come up and say, well, let's hear what Carlos has to say about this, because he knows more about communicating with the rest of the organization than any of the rest of us do. So let's hear what he has to say about this. And let's hear what Luis has to say about remote teams and how we can be most effective working remotely, and so on. The more we can trust each other and rely on the things each other has learned, the better off we're going to be in the long run. So it's more about that understanding that we are bigger than a single individual, and that we have to be able to work in that way.
Perfect. I like that. We're bigger than a single individual. That kind of tunes in with the things we say at Nearsouth, right, Chris?
Yeah, definitely.
It's very well aligned. Okay.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, Diana. That was my question of the day. And I also I gotta confess that I couldn't resist. You know, when you mentioned the clouds of dead cells, skin cells, I couldn't resist it. Not looking at it. Yay! It's actually, and it's actually, you know, body surrounded by clouds of skin, bacteria.
I'm gonna become a germaphobe with that, right?
Yeah. Well, you know, they say that the bacteria in our gut, in our intestine, is like our second brain. And so maybe the bacteria that are around us are our third brain that connects with other people.
Or the sixth sense.
Right. The sixth sense. We don't know where some of that kind of information comes from.
Yeah.
But it comes from our physical being. Parts of it we haven't recognized yet.
Yeah, and how's that for a science fact? It's right here, gentlemen. It's right here. As they say, it's in our internet, so it's got to be true, right?
It's got to be true.
Okay, Luis. Sorry for that. I mean, I just had to say that, but yeah. All right, Luis, back to you.
Yeah, no problem. I think I just have one last question, and it's going to sound like 3 questions in one, because I want people to get some value out of this conversation. And so my question is, what would you suggest for remote teams to hold their retrospectives and be valuable? I have heard many comments. The most common issue is usually action items are never followed up on.
Yes.
And some other teams usually tell us that, you know, that's for tech industry, which I think it shouldn't be only for tech industry. Yeah. So what would you suggest for that? I wrote about this, about the action items never being followed up on, and my favorite line from that article is that, you know, the output, it necessarily need to be an action item, an actionable, precise, explicit item, right? Because usually it's just about complaining, and then if the people don't know how to lead that conversation very well, it's just going to be a bunch of complaints that are not going to bring any value. So how do remote teams get the most value from retrospectives, and what can you also suggest to non-tech organizations to benefit from retrospectives?
Well, I mean, when Esther and I were writing the book, very often we got a question about, you know, well, why are you writing? First, people would say, how can you write a whole book about retrospectives? It's only 3 questions, right? And of course, that's the wrong way to go about retrospectives, because if we just say, well, what worked well, what should we do differently, you know, and what did we like or whatever, then we end up with lists, like you said, and one of them at least is going to be a list of complaints.
Sure.
And somehow people think that magically will turn into action without any further real discussion on our part. And of course it doesn't. So that's only one part of the retrospective, and that's the analysis part. And very often we are doing that, and what we call in the retrospective framework, gather insights, right? Or generate insights. When we do that without the piece that comes before that, which is gathering data so that we make sure everybody's working from the same set of data, then we end up, you know, people are just giving their opinions, and there's no real coalescing, no coherence in what's being discussed. It's just a list of opinions. I think this worked well. I think we should do that differently, so on. So that was one question that Esther and I got. The other question that we got was, well, why are you writing this just for software teams? Retrospectives can help anyone.
Exactly.
And we said, yes, that's true. And software are people. That's why we're writing for them. That's why we focus there first. Because they're the ones we really wanted to help. That's our tribe, right?
All right.
But absolutely, retrospectives are being applied in many different kind of business contexts and in nonprofit contexts as well, all over the place. So,
Right.
you know, the form of a retrospective where we look for, we understand the current, we get a common understanding of the current situation, which I call learning. And then we spend some time making meaning of that, analyzing it, understanding the implications of the current situation, which I call thinking together. And then we make some decisions about, well, so what does this tell us about what might be the one or two most fruitful things to pursue from here? What experiment would we like to try? And how well, you know, what's our hypothesis? And let's construct an experiment, and then let's evaluate the outcome of that experiment at the end. You've got a plan for that. Or something is just so obvious. We said we wanted to pair, we're not pairing enough. Let's set up a pairing rotation and figure that out. So sometimes it's just an action, or you know, our stand-up meeting every day isn't really working very well when we do it first thing in the morning because half of us don't show up that early. Let's change it to try having our stand-up meeting right before lunch when everybody's here. That's just an action you could take and implement right away. In other instances, you need to do more research. You might need to run an experiment or something. But for software teams in particular, who have usually a pretty big load of work, you really don't want to take on more than just one or two improvements in each cycle.
All right.
And some of them may be multi-step. So in this cycle, in this next iteration or this next sprint, we're going to try this. And if that works out in the following sprint, we can build on it with that, and so on. So a lot of it has to do with finding things that people are excited about. Right. What I find often is that people want to go for what they think is the most important action item, as opposed to the one people really want to try. You know, I mean, I go with the energy of the group. If there's something they have, you know, if they'd rather try having a brown bag lunch on Friday than, you know, really digging down into how they're doing TDD, well, let them have the brown bag lunch first. And when they build that muscle of taking action and seeing results from that, sooner or later, they're going to get ready to take on TDD or, you know, design patterns or, you know, other kinds of things that are going to take a little more, or changing their interactions with their product person. Those things are going to take more work, and you kind of have to build up to those. So it's fine with me if you do the small actions first that people really have excitement and energy for, and get that pattern of successful improvements under the team's belt, so to speak, and then build on it from there.
Great. I just read about it being.
Oops.
Luis, we lost you.
Lost his sound.
Yeah.
Hello. There you go.
There you go.
We got you back. We got you back.
So,
I was commenting that I just read about it yesterday, about that being a great technique against procrastination. Like, take on the task that you really like before starting with something else.
Right. There was some people from Argentina who I was talking to one time that were talking about using their retrospectives as a way to build new habits. So they had done a lot of research on what it takes to let go of a bad habit and build a good habit, and they were applying that in their teams, which I thought was a brilliant idea. And I haven't heard from them lately, but they had already developed some techniques for doing that. And I think those kinds of experiments with retrospectives going on all over the world, it'd be great if we could find a way to bring those all together somewhere.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Just a final comment: how do you feel about it being retrospectives being a global global, technique. It's recognized globally. People from all over the world using it.
Yeah.
Have you visited some other places, and have you find
Oh,
that they
yes.
work different in some other
Yeah.
cultures or
Oh,
stuff?
I not so much that, but I have visited a lot of other places,
Yeah.
and I haven't been everywhere in the world, but I've been a lot of places, and it is rewarding to see people using retrospectives. Every year since 2002, we have had an event called the Retrospective Facilitators Gathering,
Yeah.
where people
International.
who spend a lot of time doing leading retrospectives will come together and sort of learn new techniques from each other and share knowledge and so on. And that so far that has gone back and forth between one year it's in the US and then the next year it's usually someplace in Europe. And it has not expanded out beyond that. But I hope someday we see retrospective facilitators gatherings happening, in a much more widespread way, because that is a really useful thing for people to come together and learn from each other about, what is really effective for them around retrospectives. But we get people from South Africa, we get people from South America, we get lots of people come to the gatherings. They're really great.
Yeah, it's impressive to see how agile methodologies are making a boom in some sub-Saharan countries that you wouldn't imagine.
Yes.
They have developers and all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I know
And
ThoughtWorks has put a lot of energy into that as well. So
great.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. And so finally, before we started the talk, you wanted to mention the organization design forum, which you're going to be sharing on 2018. What do you invite the people? Okay.
Well, we are having we have an annual conference. The Organization Design Forum is a nonprofit trade association, professional association for people who are organization designers. Mm-hmm. I became involved in it because it was clear to me that people who were doing agile adoptions were doing organization design without even necessarily knowing that that's what they were doing.
Correct.
And so there's a body of work, a body of knowledge about this that people can learn from. And so I got involved with the organization, and I've been involved with the conference for the past few years. And for 2018, I'm the conference chair. The conference will be toward the end of April. I can't remember the dates right now, but it's the last week of April. Mm-hmm. And it will be in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And so we will be able to visit the University of Michigan Business School. That's added a lot to our understanding of organizational systems and so on. A lot of the research has come out of there over the last many decades. And then also Menlo Innovations is there, and Richard Sheridan with his Joy Inc. And so he'll be participating in the conference as well. So I'm pretty excited about it. I think it's going to be a really great conference. And I hope more Agile folks and software folks decide to attend. We always get a good number of professional organization designers, but I think there's so much richness there for people in the Agile community as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for the invitation. Hopefully somebody gets a chance to go there. I know that Ross School of Business in Michigan,
right,
it's a very important one, so
right,
it should be a good opportunity.
Yeah, we hope that we'll be able to visit the campus and maybe see some of the things that go on there. So
nice.
All those things aren't in place yet, but we're working on them. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Luis, that was your last question, right? Your last comment? Okay, cool.
All said. I think I covered all the topics that I wanted to cover.
Perfect. Yeah, no, actually, yeah, you did a great job as usual. So, and actually, yeah, the timing is good. We're approaching the final segment, and I mean the wrap up. And for the record, I could not refrain myself from looking into the VUCA part, the acronym. Yeah. And the Harvard Business Review says, well, it kind of pinpoints that it's a catch-all for it's crazy out there.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
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 There you go. All right. Well, Diana, the only thing left for me to do was, of course, send you a big heartfelt, warm thank you to you for having been with us today. Mm-hmm. And of course, for those of you who are watching or will be watching, remember that you can, if you missed part or all of this interview, it's all going to be there on our DojoLIVE website. And of course, all the contact info for Diana is going to be there as well. Besides, you know, she already shared his Twitter handle, but it's all going to be in there. So keep an eye on that, folks. For that, folks. So, Diana, Luis, as ever, thank you so much for your sharing your expertise, Diana, and also you too, Luis. And you have a great rest of the day. And let me just briefly mention before we go that next week we are going to have another great interview, and we're going to be talking to Brenda Barre and Raj Singh from GoWoman.com. That's travel tech talk. So for those of you who are interested in travel tech, travel software technologies, and in preparation for the Focusrite event, it's Wednesday at 3 o'clock Central Standard Time on DojoLIVE. Don't mark your calendars, and I'll see you there. Without further ado, thank you, Diana, again, and thank you, Luis. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Diana.
Bye-bye. Thank you.